Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Esoteric Survivalist. We continue our discussion on the 5 disciplines of harnessing consciousness and life force by the first one, which is nonviolence. But this originates in presumption. So we need to understand presumption a little better before we move on. You see, presumption, as the first yama, is the actual first, shall we say, the first thing we do in this eightfold process of harnessing. It's the first thing we address. And the material itself says that the root cause of human suffering that we are remedying with this is a state called avidya. Avidya literally means ignorance, and it is literally translated as not seeing. However, esoterically speaking, this is a state. This is our normal everyday state, a state of being completely closed off to our inner truth and the reflection of the world of our inner truth. And this can be remedied. Now, this avidya is remedied first by referencing the mind in such a way that we cultivate certain points and principles that support its function against the powers of alienation. So avidya, ignorance, is not just a state of not knowing anything or being mentally shut down. It's a full state of shutdown. It's a state that cannot expand into and activate enough of its relationship with existence to even express its own identity, so whatever it does express is a kind of falsehood. Now, before I continue, I'd like to interject and just say that for personal reasons and also to be more true to the material, I need to give more time to these recordings, which means at least they're going to be consistent as weekly ones. So all of this information is going to be intertwined with the information of where the Substack written articles are going and where the podcasts are going. It'll all be intertwined. But the basic way to address it is through these discussions, because esoteric survivalism, again, it's about moving through a spiritually challenging situation. And spiritually challenging situations can be mentally, emotionally, physically challenging, or at least one of the above, whatever reflects most accurately the dynamics of our own consciousness and identity that need focus and transmutation, I would say, but that basically need the corruption purified or healed. Now, one way to approach this is with the following example. I would call it the allegory of the bear, but from a shaman's perspective. So if you approach a bear physically, it's a wild bear, your presumption would be, oh, what a cute bear. That could be lethal. If you run away from the bear, you don't understand its nature, that's presumption, that could be lethal, so it'll just chase you down. Any kind of physical confrontation of the bear is based on a presumption that you will make it through, or it's suicide, which is another presumption. Basically, jumping in that you're not going to make it through. The point is that what a shaman would do is first meet the bear on a playing field that is more level, more equal, and where the shaman isn't going to be harmed. There, the bear and the shaman exchange greetings, shall we say, in a very non-civilized fashion, because the shaman has to confront all those preconceptions that get realized in the physical plane because of the bear's nature. However, in the shamanic plane, in the etheric plane, not shamanic, whatever, astral you might call it, on this level, the bear is actually more, you can communicate with the intelligence behind the species itself. So it's almost like speaking to the presiding spirit of the species. In any case, it's something that human intelligence can communicate with on almost an equal level, even though these mammals individually do have their own level of sentience and intelligence. You just got to reach it. However, the communication in spirit form would be of the bear as a wild beast, what it represents, its strength misconstrued in the human context, and how a loving faith could reverse everything around. But you got to be on a level playing field. You cannot be seen by the bear instinctively as food, then the consciousness will not be able to come in. So similarly, preconceptions block. So in order to move through these preconceptions, you hit a point where you're actually unraveling all of your former dogmas, which is not the same as second guessing yourself. That may be a necessary evil at some point because you don't know better, but usually, well, you don't have to second guess yourself. But that's called faith, and most of faith is almost like a fake it till you make it for people. Faith is something that's also an inner sense. It's a little hole through the barrier of avidya, the barrier of ignorance, the barrier of that state of diminished capacity where we don't even see what's in front of our face because we can't compute it and we're blocked from it. So to clear all that out, a mental frame is established so we can navigate through the situation that is malnourishing our spirit. And if our spirit is malnourished, our will is malnourished, our good fortune is malnourished, our whole existence is wanting. At the same time, we cultivate our our psychic immune system through precisely dealing with the mental level first. So being able to reach a point where you can be intuitive enough that you don't have to presume anything, you're just directly perceiving it. And even if somebody else tells you you're judgmental, well, it's up to you to directly perceive the truth of that or not. There is no objective, we don't have the luxury of referring to an objective standard. We are challenged to be mature enough and responsible enough to stand up on our own standard, which is our ultimate subjectivity, meaning our own personal reference frame. Through that reference frame, as somebody heals and harnesses their inner potentialities toward that end and you become more whole, eventually things open up and you reach a state of not having to fabricate because everything is self-evident. And we're not talking just intellectually. This is an emotional state, a sensate state. It opens up the body and the mind to complete integration that's functional. Now, when you are able to suspend presumption, you are actually the most objective you could be in your relations because you allow the environment to speak to you. And that leads to the point where you need to be truthful with the environment, at least as far as your consciousness is concerned. Now, if this isn't a morality thing, so maybe there's cases where you need to not say the truth, to conceal it, or maybe you need to actually lie to save your life or something. But we're talking about being genuine, actually being genuine, to not fool yourself. And if you say, well, I'm just a good for nothing, well, that's also fooling yourself. That is not being genuine. Genuine is being objective with your subjectivity, but allowing yourself to trust that your personal frame of reference is its own objective standard, just like anybody else's. Now, this is not radical relativism. That's why we go into creating reference frames for the mental, perspective, for the mind itself, so the identity can actually have space within which to move that is sustainable. So you become genuine. It's not about lying or not lying, but it's about being genuine and honest in all of your dealings, no matter how they are. So if you say, well, circumstances demand I got to do this, It's not the behavior patterns, but it's the motive behind them, and you're not justifying the means here with the intended ends. This is a state that is experienced. It's not like, here it is, I'm describing it, you just imitate it, and then it'll happen. This is a state that comes step by step for the purpose of actually being in tune with everything. You start suspending all of your presumptions. You realize what they are, but at the same time, you're not taken by counter-presumptions that are themselves presumptions. So this goes round and round, and it's almost like a full-time job of self-observation and worldly observation. And that leads you to being genuine, because you cannot help but be genuine in that state. It's a waste of time, energy, effort. It's a pain. And that leads you to a state of respecting boundaries, because then you know that, well, everything that happens, everybody does for a certain reason, and it all has to do with maintaining their own boundaries. Now, if those boundaries are afflicted and they seem to be like a bottomless pit where they have to expand the boundaries at the expense of everything else, that's a whole other story. Right now, we're talking about respecting the integrity of not just yourself, but everything else. And if anything betrays that integrity, then you will be aware of it. Now, you're not everybody, you're not going to do something about it necessarily in the physical sense. That's up to anybody, but we are discussing reaching the point of discernment where you don't make mistakes. And because your heart can be in the right place, you can have the best of intentions, and you do not need to pave the way to hell with them. This is where the best intentions actually have a moral framework that is not enforced. One step leads to all the rest, as long as we have the desire to be whole and not just run away, as long as we are honest with ourselves. And that's, again, being genuine, which is, again, remove the presumptions and you'll find your true nature, which stems on the desire for betterment. And betterment means being healthier, being more empowered, being more free, and being able to experience levels of attaining fulfillment without compromising existence and yourself in the process. So morality is not some drag, and it's not a rain on anybody's parade, because it is often portrayed that way because it is misunderstood. Morality should be an organic thing that makes sense to anybody who is not under the chaos of puberty. So, then, because of instincts being overwhelming and society being underwhelming and overwhelming at the same time, and so much artifice and alienation, it's difficult to handle that life force coming through. However, maturity eventually leads to a state where one can see that, okay, if I just suspend presumption and don't fall for the presumption of thinking I'm not presuming, or in a perpetual state of self-doubt, which is another presumption, eventually you do have references. So your presumption leads to being genuine. See, all of these things are dynamic. That leads to respecting boundaries and the integrity at all levels, like psychic, psychological, etc., and not falling for the legalese distortions of these things. This is where we move from a state of respecting integrity to a state of brahmacharya. Now, this brahmacharya is infamous because it is celibacy, and it is translated literally as the way or path of Brahma. Brahma is the deity representing manifestation. It represents society. It represents propriety, all of the necessary rituals, all of the necessary prayers, everything. Whereas Vishnu is society holding together and all of that, propriety, the very fabric of it. Brahma is the particulars of the fabric. What I want to say here is that brahmacharya is the way of established thinking. It is basically an advisory to saying that if you want to maintain balance, do not turn your back on society, do not turn your back on education, on whatever information is around you. First, on whatever can bring you to a state of eloquence, to a state of knowing the ways and means of your culture, all of these things, basically the status quo. It doesn't mean, you can't have relations. That would really be a drag, because you're denying the sexual instinct in the name of sublimation or whatever, or channeling the energies into spirituality, and you are establishing a split between matter, or biology actually, and spirit. This is something far deeper, not deeper, but far more extensive. And it means that adopting a lifestyle that is creative, because essentially Brahma is the creator, Brahma is the shaper, so Vishnu is the field and dreams of Brahma doing all of the specifics. And usually asuras or demons would do mantras and pray to Brahma, and Brahma would give them all this power, and then they would wreak havoc. So it all comes back to this guy. Still, mastering the path of Brahma is part of balancing the mind so it is capable of performing the harnessing. And that also means that the path of creation, of shaping, of events, of traditions, all of this needs to be under the premise of moderation, common sense, heart. You cannot sacrifice essence in favor of these forms just because they're established. The whole point is to be able to say, look, can I integrate within the context of my environment? Integrating in an informed and creative manner, because Brahma isn't the bad guy, but it's basically the weakest link. So denying it is not really the way to go. But a Brahmin, for example, is meant to act like Brahma. So purity is a thing, physical purity, spiritual purity, sexual purity. But at the same time, when Bhairava came Bhairava, the incarnation of Shiva, incarnated in order to punish Brahma, because he was going to go rape his own daughter. So Shiva cut off Bhairava cut off the head, or Bhairava. The pronunciation is terrible, but when I do the mantras, I do pronounce it correctly. So the point is here that mastering this kind of social adaptability doesn't mean you have to be popular, but it just means being informed, respecting creativity, opening up to your own creativity, and using the forms of your society as a means to express. So you don't have to deny society in order to transcend the limitations of it. At the same time, once you master this, you will have the confidence not to hold a fist at every opportunity, not to grasp everything that you acquire or that's there for fear of losing it. You will be able to trust life, because there will be discernment that will be developed in the mind that will allow it to move on, and then perception will open to the point of an intuitive sense that leads to the internalized disciplines. And these internalized disciplines are the product of a balanced mind, a mind that trusts life. So Brahmacharya is an interesting point, because I think it's the thing, the moral premise, so to speak, that tends to twist the situation where it doesn't need to go. But if you return it to an overall premise of bring Brahma into your life, into your mind, where it's supposed to be, even though he's marginalized from the rest of Hinduism. And I don't think at the time of when these aphorisms were written that this marginalization was actually in full swing. It was probably later with the tantric sects, SCCTS, emerging. And that is really cool, because in the next installment we are going to get into the internalized dynamics. Now, this is where we're almost shifting into a bona fide esoteric approach. This is where we're not talking about moralism, but we're talking about what all of these principles are giving us, because we're becoming actually discerning. The whole point of this is to become more discerning, is to go against the state of being deaf, dumb, and blind to the truth of the situation around us and within us at any given moment. Usually the level of interpretation is very bare bones, where all we want is to satisfy survival needs, emotional needs, and to keep ourselves distracted long enough to not face our uncertainties. There is more to life than that, and the esoteric survivalist is willing to embrace it, because one of the biggest, if not the biggest, let's say nutritional superfoods, spiritual superfoods, is the ability to sustain a natural trust and faith in existence, or in the premise of existence. It's something religions claim to do, and maybe they do, but you can do this directly. It's not easy, but you can even use it through the context of society, of religion, and that's what they say, because part of this brahmacharya is to be religious or faithful in some way, in a legit way, where there is a whole procedure approaching it, so it's structured. It doesn't mean going to church or doing things like that. And we're also talking about a society that was differently structured than the modern society. So there are different adaptations, plus the list of disciplines here, or reining ins, or moral precepts or principles, is different in different manuals. This version of the 8-limb yoga has it like this, and this is the more popular one, I guess. There are other versions that have different ones, or additional ones, usually. There are tantric versions that have other ones as well, but by and large, these 5 cover a spectrum of a process that begins with lifting preconceptions in a way that doesn't just leave you hanging all the time with uncertainty, but which actually stimulates, kind of like the Wim Hof method, where you jump into icy water and eventually it stimulates the body to release endorphins and cannabinoids, and where you get used to it and even thrive and your health improves. So here you're jumping into the deep end of releasing preconceptions and challenged not to fall into the trap of radical relativism, which is just another form of logical manipulation. You see, with the intuitive side opening up, a reason doesn't take a back seat, but at least you're co-drivers. So learning to integrate that is part of moving through to a position, a mental position, where you can actually turn around and enter into the deeper psyche and start making adjustments, true adjustments. These reference frames will allow you to make those adjustments. That is from the perspective of the esoteric survivalist. So, thank you for listening, and until next time, Magus out.